Hi, welcome to my review of The Great Gatsby, directed by Baz Luhrmann, a film that is an adaptation of the classic American novel of the same name that features a mysterious and an incredibly wealthy young man, Jay Gatsby, who takes an interest in his next-door neighbor, Nick Carraway, because he believes Nick can reunite him with his old love, Daisy.
Gatsby. He had an extraordinary sense of hope. But I had the uneasy feeling that he was guarding secrets.
Milk tears, I did this for you.
Gatsby. I'd like to know who he is and what he does.
Gatsby? What Gatsby?
My boss.
Mr. Carraway, this is my good friend, Mr. Maya Wolfshot.
I understand you're looking for a business connection.
Happens to be confidential. You understand?
Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and get this out of the way. I've never actually read The Great Gatsby. Now, I was supposed to read it in high school, but quite frankly, being the moronic teenager that I was at the time, I really didn't care to. But you know what? I say that it's good that I didn't read it because now I can judge The Great Gatsby for what it is without being biased. And you know what I think? I think The Great Gatsby is far from being a good film, and I'm going to tell you why. For starters, the cinematography is so overly polished, it looks like it's been ripped straight out of a bad Vanity Fair photo shoot, and because of this, everyone and everything looks fake, and quite frankly, it looks damn ugly. And on top of that, this is possibly my biggest problem with the film, is that there is way too much freaking CGI that is completely unnecessary. The CGI does not look very good, and furthermore, it's just lazy and uninspiring. Sadly enough, it was very seldom that I didn't see some sort of CG background, and that bothered the living hell out of me. And when the film didn't have an overdose of CGI is when some of the actual sets themselves looked way too over the top and looked slightly unrealistic. And it's not just because of the time period, but in general. This film takes place in the 1920s, and I had to keep on reminding myself that throughout watching the film. What makes matters worse is the film's soundtrack. With the exception of Lana Del Rey's Young and Beautiful, every single track that was used in this film was incredibly out of its element. Artists like Jay-Z, Beyonce, will.i.am, and some others all have tracks that are in this movie. Other than Baz Luhrmann trying to appeal to a more modern day audience, there's really no reason for featuring these artists' material in a movie like this. It makes no sense in the slightest to me. It leaves me with questions like what's so wrong with using great music that is relevant to the 1920s time period? What's wrong with letting a modern audience discover some great musicians that have long been forgotten about since their time? I just don't get it. Now, I've never actually sat down and watched a Baz Luhrmann picture, but from what I understand is that he's a very self-indulgent filmmaker who only makes films clearly for himself, and that's okay, but just because he chooses to degrade what seems to be a great story doesn't mean his film is any good. Quite frankly, given everything that I've said, I think it's offensive to the film's source material, and that's possibly the worst thing a filmmaker can do when dealing with an adaptation. Moving on, I will say the best thing about this film is some of the acting. Tobey Maguire is good as Nick Carraway, and it's nice to see him back on the big screen, so I am looking forward to seeing what he does next outside of The Great Gatsby. As for Carey Mulligan, I thought she was good, however I have heard some complaints regarding her character. A lot of people have complained that she was underdeveloped, and I can see that, however, I just saw her character Daisy being someone who's all style and no substance, which is a lot like this film. Joel Edgerton also appears in the film as Tom Buchanan. He gives by far one of the best performances in the film. I thought he was great. However, what almost saved this movie for me was Leonardo Dicaprio's portrayal as Jay Gatsby. Every time he appears on screen, I was thinking to myself, there we go, this is something worthy of a nice amount of praise. And like I said, he almost saved it for me. So if there's any reason to watch this film, it would be because of him. Now, before I wrap this review up, I do want to say that the very few scenes that didn't have an overly flamboyant setting is when the look of the film became less distracting, less bloated, and gave the story some much needed room to breathe. Unfortunately though, these moments are not in the film nearly enough and greatly suffers because of it. Overall, as I was walking out of the cinema, I was thinking a 2.5, but as I was making this review, it got a little lower. There are certain aspects in the film that did anger me a bit, so I really can't give The Great Gatsby anything higher than a low 2 out of 5. If you're someone who's interested in the film but at the same time is unsure of seeing it, then I would just recommend that you rent it when it comes out. It's not quite a terrible film, but it's not a good one either. I'm Colyn Kirkland, and thanks for watching.